everyone. Welcome to the Trail Talk Highpointing podcast. I'm your host, Lauren, and the highpointer we're speaking with today is a former guest, Mihai Giurgiulescu, our favorite American Romanian highpointer. Mihai, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Lauren. It's great to be back.
Yeah. And for the viewers on YouTube, you can see that Mihai's wearing a Rutas de los Volcanes en Ecuador shirt that maps out some of the volcanoes that he climbed recently. And that's what he's here to talk about because, Mihai, we've talked about your high points and we'll get to those also in this episode, but I want to hear about your Ecuador peaks. So, first of all, how have you been?
I've been doing pretty well. Thank you, Lauren. I hope you've been well as well.
Yeah. So, Ecuador peaks, why did you decide to do these?
This actually came about as an idea from our Mexico trip at the end of 2022.
Yeah.
When our guide on that trip proposed that we do Ecuador in 2023. So several of us from the Mexico trip talked and something was put together for the end of 2023. Initially, I wasn't going to be on that trip, but decided to join it, I don't know, maybe like halfway through last year. And that turned out to be my main international trip last year. So
That's fantastic. Now, what guide service did you use in Mexico and again in Ecuador?
So our guide goes by Caxan, Kaxan, Caxan Adventures. And yes, he was our main guide on the Mexican volcanoes, and then also in Ecuador, where we had other local guides that he brought in to help us out.
Okay. And in Mexico, you did Itzta and Pico de Orizaba?
That's correct. So we did Orizaba, the highest one, and Ista, we did Nevado de Toluca, and then we also did La Malinche. So
Oh, cool. I've done Nevado de Toluca. When I got to the top of that, there was a soccer team practicing.
That was a very popular one. Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, that's so cool. I've never spoken with anyone that's done Toluca before. That's awesome. Now, Ecuador. So you wanted to go back and climb the volcanoes.
Yes. So let me just say that this was a multi-country trip.
Okay.
So in addition to Ecuador, I put two other countries at the beginning and at the end, one each. I started off in Guatemala, actually, because I wanted to do some acclimatizing for Ecuador. And
Okay.
since our trip was going to be right after Thanksgiving, I decided to use Thanksgiving holiday to go to Guatemala and do peaks that are, pretty high, a good start to get me acclimatized. And then I finished it off with Costa Rica at the end, where I also did the country hike.
Okay. So did you do the country high point of Guatemala as well?
I did. That was like the highest one there. It's 13,800, I want to say, or 900 feet, 4,200 meters.
Now, you're coming from Bishop, so you can acclimatize there, kind of, right?
You can.
What am I
It's
missing?
true. Except that I was a little lazy about it, and then with the onset of winter, a lot of the things here are not as accessible as they used to be. Although I will say that last year in November, White Mountain Peak, which is a 14er right outside my window, basically, was still accessible. So I did it over Veterans Day last year to kind of like get the whole party started.
Cool.
So yes, I had the advantage of doing that, but my main acclimatization started in Guatemala.
And so what was that hike like in Guatemala? Were there other climbers? Is it a guided hike? Can you talk about that?
Sure. So we did two peaks. We did Volcan Acatenango first, which is right outside Antigua, a famous UNESCO city. And then we did Tajumulco, which is the country high point. And on both of these, I was with my friend from Lithuania, who came and did one more volcano before I arrived, and then he did three more after I left. So he basically cleaned out the country's ultras, because that's how he operates. But I was only able to join in for two of those. So
Okay.
when the two of us had arrived, I had contacted an organizer before this, and she arranged all of the logistics for us. So basically, we had a driver, and then we had local guides for each of these two volcanoes who took us up. Early in the morning, there were alpine starts in both cases. And then we just got to the top. Acatenango had great weather on that day. The views were fabulous from the summit. Um, Tahumulco, not so much. There was cloudy. Clouds were coming in and out. It was a little bit foggy too, but it was still beautiful. It was like very Jurassic Park-like to be in that area.
Cool. Now, when you get to Ecuador, there's acclimatizing that takes place there, right? I mean, just being in the city in Quito, like what's the elevation there?
Yeah, so Quito, which is the capital of Ecuador, is one of the highest cities in the world. It's at about 10,000 feet, so almost 3,000 meters. So as you get off the plane, you're starting up pretty high. But the group I was with decided to do two acclimatization hikes on our own, some of the lower volcanoes to kind of get ready for the main program, which was Cayambe, Tungurahua, and then Chimborazo. And all three of those are over 5,000 meters, so over 16,000 feet. So we acclimatized by doing Pichincha. Volcan Pichincha is right outside Quito on the west side. It's 15,800 feet, I want to say, 4,700 meters. That one was pretty easy because we were able to drive all the way up to the refuge, to the hut, and then from there, it was an easy hike, even though people were not used to the thin air. And then a couple of days later, we drove to the north of Ecuador in a town called Otavalo, and then from there we climbed Volcan Imbabura, which is the main peak in that area, and a beautiful one too. The weather was not great on these acclimatization hikes. It was cloudy at the top. We couldn't see anything. It was foggy, so there was some navigation to be done, along with some scrambling. So it wasn't a good start in terms of views, but it got us what we needed in terms of acclimatization. So that was good.
That's really interesting. Now, the town of Otavalo, is that how you say it?
Correct. And that's where I got the shirt.
Oh, cool. Okay. I've heard it's a really cool village full of different markets and food vendors and stuff. Did you experience that?
We did. One of the main objectives when we were in Otavalo was to go to the central market,
Okay.
where they have everything on sale: clothes, scarves, anything you can think of. And we were wandering through the market. We kind of got spread out. And our driver, Javier, who didn't speak any English, all communication was in Spanish. We catch up with him at some point, and he's wearing this shirt, but in a different color. So we all look at him and then we're like, "Where did you find that shirt?" And then he takes us back to the stand where he purchased it, and we all end up getting the same shirt in just different colors because it was so cool.
It is a really cool shirt. It's, I'm sure it sparks some really interesting conversation when you wear it,
Yeah,
especially
yeah,
at where you work.
yeah. I actually took it to the office today, so it did spark conversations.
And Mihai, can you tell the listeners what you do for a living?
Sure. I am a GIS professional. That's Geographic Information Systems. I'm essentially a cartographer. I make maps and I do spatial analysis.
Now, when a lot of listeners think of Ecuador volcanoes, surely they're thinking of Cotopaxi, and that was closed this year, correct? Because of an eruption last year?
That is correct. We had some hopes for Cotopaxi to open at the end of the year. The authorities did not allow that, so our guides changed the program kind of like at the last minute to do Tungurahua, Volcan Tungurahua instead of Cotopaxi. So it was actually a great replacement, even though it was not as high. It was a very memorable experience. So no Cotopaxi this time.
Okay. Now, is Cotopaxi a national park there?
Correct, it is,
Okay.
yes. And it's actually it's open to go to base camp to the
Okay.
highest hut. A friend of mine just got back from Ecuador a few weeks ago, and he trekked to the hut. But above that, which is at 16,000 feet, you are not allowed to climb. So the summit is basically off limits.
Sure. And Cotopaxi is 19,000 and some change, right?
Yes, that's correct. It's about as high as Kilimanjaro.
Oh, interesting. But the elevation gain is less, obviously, because you're starting at what elevation are you starting at there?
You're starting out at 16,000, almost 900, I want to say. It's very high.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. Then you go to Chimborazo, which is the country high point, and the
Or
elevation of that is 20,000
it's
or 20.
20,500.
Okay.
Denali is 20,300, and this is 20,500.
That's interesting. And then what was the starting elevation?
That one also had a very high starting point. You can actually drive to another refuge, which is at about 14,900, I want to say. And then from there, you hike up to High Camp on Chimborazo, which is at 17, 17 and something. It's 5,300 meters. Um, the summit itself is 6,200, so the difference is 900 meters, so almost 3,000 feet.
And you
Um,
spent the night at that high camp?
and we did, yes. That's what everyone does. You do an alpine start at midnight
Hmm.
for the summit, and then you come right back down in time before the snow starts melting and the crevasses open.
Okay. And so it was you and how many other people?
We had a group of 9 climbers total, and a rotating number of guides. So it was 6 Americans and then 3 Mexicans on the climbing team, and then the rest of the staff were Ecuadorian or Mexican.
How was the weather on the summit day?
The weather was good. It was very windy though. So all night long we had wind blowing in our faces. Um, at the summit, it wasn't as bad, but coming back down, the wind picked up again. So yeah, you could see the clouds streaming around the summit
Hmm.
from down below, and then when we were actually up there, you could see all the fog blowing past us. So you knew it was high winds. It was pretty cold.
And did you feel prepared?
Yeah, I felt good. I couldn't sleep the night before. I didn't sleep the night before any of the climbs. And that's because I couldn't regulate my breathing at that altitude. So I would lie down. We lie down in a dome tent. Everyone was in the same space. People were lying down on mats. And I was trying to regulate my breathing to actually get some sleep, but I couldn't do that. It was just I felt like I was running out of air. So I basically lay awake all night, and then come time to go, we went.
Wow. Now, is that the highest elevation you've been at?
That's correct. That's a new personal record for me in terms of altitude right now.
That's great. So what's next in terms of international climbs?
Um, I don't know yet. I mean, I'm planning out this year. We're at the beginning of 2024 right now as we speak. So I have a few things that I'm working on. Um, I'm thinking Kazakhstan in midsummer, and then at the end of the year, going back to South America to Colombia for some mountains there. So,
Okay.
oh yeah, and another trip to Asia. I really want to do Fuji in Japan and Yushan in Taiwan this year. So yeah,
Is that the Taiwanese high point? I know Fuji's the Japanese high point.
yes, Yushan is the Taiwanese hike.
That's really interesting. Well, again, you'll have to come back. I love hearing your stories, so this is
Yeah,
awesome.
I
And
love to
then
talk about it.
Colombia, tell me how you're going to get to the top of that mountain. Do you have a guide?
For Colombia,
Yeah.
yes, I can't really talk about the details because there's a very complicated process to obtain access from the local, from the native population there. So it's not something that I can share details of right now. Sorry.
Sure, sure. But did you get the connection through your Mexican guide?
Exactly. Yes, he hooked it up again.
Cool. How did you find that Mexican guide?
Um, that's a good question. So when we did the Mexico trip back in 2022, I joined the trip a little later on, kind of like last minute again. And my friends who had organized it, they contacted They organized it through a guide that had guided them on a climb of Picacho del Diablo in Baja.
Okay.
So that Baja organizer knew the Mexican organizer that we're working with right now. So we met him through her. Yeah, he's really well connected in all of Latin America. So that's really a huge bonus. So thank you, Arturo, if you're watching. The last piece of that was Costa Rica. So
Oh yeah.
I headed to Costa Rica right after Ecuador, and I met a friend of mine from San Diego there. So the goal was to do Cerro Chiripo, which is the Costa Rica high point. It is not a volcano. It was the only peak that was not a volcano on this trip. But the challenge with this one was that we decided to do it in one day. And it's 25 miles round trip, 8,000 feet of gain. Very steep. It's all the way up. It can be muddy at times. So it was a challenge from a physical perspective. Can you go for this long? We started at 3 a.m. We finished at 7 p.m. So it was a 14-hour day.
Wow.
And it was tough. But it was what I was expecting. And I felt good. I didn't feel destroyed after it, but it was awesome because we were basically in the clouds the whole day. Sun came out, we had light, but we couldn't see anything around us because it was foggy. But once we get to the top, all the clouds clear. So we had a magnificent view of the Costa Rican highlands, basically. It is said that on Chiripo, if it's a super, super clear day, you can see both oceans, the Pacific and the Atlantic. But we were not that lucky. It wasn't that clear. Like some of the lowlands were covered, and we could only see our immediate vicinity, maybe like a 20-mile radius. So, but it was still great.
That sounds so fun. Now, do you have a goal to do the Central American high points?
If I can, yes. As I explained in one of the previous podcasts, one of my determining factors when I choose my climbs is the prominence
Yes.
aspect. And all of these that I did are ultra prominent mountains, especially Tajumulco in Guatemala, Chimborazo in Ecuador, and Chiripo in Costa Rica. So these three are in what is called the top 100 most prominent peaks on the planet. And some of these are very difficult ones, like the ones in the Himalayas in China. And then some of them are a little easier, like these. So I'm doing as many of those as I can right now, trying to focus on the ones that are threatened by political conflict or that have permit requirements or may have permits in the future. So I'm just trying to knock out as many as I can right now out of these top 100.
Yeah. And for the listeners who don't know, can you explain what prominence means in this context?
Absolutely. So prominence is a measure of a mountain's dominance over its surroundings, but technically refers to the drop from the mountain's summit to the lowest point between that mountain and the next highest summit. So a good example of this is Mount Whitney here in California. That one has over 10,000 feet of prominence because the next highest point from Whitney is actually down in Mexico. It's one of those Mexican volcanoes. And if you drop from the summit of Whitney to get to that Mexican volcano, the lowest point you'll hit is something like 4,000 feet somewhere in Mexico. And then you go up again. So that's what prominence is. It's a measure of how much the summit sticks above its surroundings until you hit the next highest. It's a little technical and difficult for some people to wrap their heads around, but once you get it, you get it.
Okay. Well, I didn't know that it was until the next highest peak. I thought it was just a measure from the base to the summit.
No, it's not like that because how can I explain this without taking too much time?
You're like, how can I dumb this down for Lauren?
No, I'm sure other people are just as confused, but it's when you're thinking of a mountain, right? You're thinking of contour lines, right? So all the contour lines are stacked up. So another way to think of prominence is where is the next contour line? Where does it start? Does not include the mountain that I'm on. So the low point is where the next contour line starts for the next highest summit. So that's
Okay.
what prominence is.
Okay. Oh, that's really interesting. And refresh my memory. Do you want to do all the prominent peaks in the US?
Yeah, I'm working on it. I don't know
Hmm.
if I'll ever finish the list. Some of them are very technical. Um, but yeah, my goal is to just get to as many of them as I can and enjoy them. That's
Of
the main thing.
course. Well, your Ecuador climbs and your Central American climbs sound like a lot of fun. Congratulations on all
Thank
of the
you.
summits, and it sounds like a really cool experience. And
It
thanks for
was
sharing
really
that
cool.
with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last thing I want to say is all the people that I've met in my travels to these countries have been amazing people. So
Yeah.
I just want to give a shout out to everyone who helped me that or was with me. Ecuador is a wonderful country full of wonderful people. We enjoyed not just traveling around, but the food and the experiences. We talked about the market in Otavalo. We also had a great time in Quito. Um, and then all around the country. So I cannot speak highly enough of Ecuador. And same thing with Guatemala. Wonderful people. You know, there may be conflicts there every once in a while, but that does not change who you're interacting with. So I highly recommend visiting these places. It's great.
That's fantastic. And how long was the Ecuador trip in total?
In total, it was 24 days from the time I left until I got back. Guatemala was 5 days, Ecuador was 13, and then Costa Rica was another 6.
Awesome. All right, now let's move on to US high points. What have you been up to?
Yeah, so I did get my high points last year. Um, I did not get anything done outside of my state or surrounding states in the first half of the year, but then I did a big trip back in July when I went to the south. I started working on my southern states, which I hadn't had done much in previously. So I flew to Nashville and then I rented a car and did a big loop in which I hit Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and then Tennessee itself before going back to Nashville. So I did a big circle, and I did those Appalachian Six, I guess, for the lack of a better name.
Yeah, how was it?
It was awesome. I was by myself on that one, but even so, I really enjoyed it. I made it a point to hike to all of these. I did not drive up any of them.
Hmm.
Um, so I found trails or roads that would take me there with some effort. Like I wanted to put some effort into it. I think we talked about this before too.
Yeah.
So I found ways to climb all of these six on trails. So that was great.
What was your favorite?
I really liked Mount Mitchell in North Carolina.
Hmm.
And let me say that again, it was July. It was super hot. It was super humid, especially down in South Carolina and in Georgia. Uh, but I did get an early start on Mount Mitchell, and I did the Mount Mitchell Trail that comes in from the east side.
Hmm.
So I was in the forest the whole time, no views, but you know, it was nice. I was by myself. I ran into like maybe 5 people until I got to the top, and then it was boom, a zoo once I got
Yeah.
there.
How was Mount Rogers in Virginia?
That one was also pretty nice. It was a cloudy, overcast day, and I actually got rained on after I left the summit. I enjoyed hiking that section of the Appalachian Trail,
Hmm.
which I had always wanted to do. I saw like one of the ponies that everyone talks about at Mount Rogers, and I saw it on the way back. But yeah, lots of people there too. I can't remember the name of that park. I think it's called Grayson Highlands State Park.
Yes.
I made it a point to get there super early, so I got a parking spot right at the trailhead. Um, then I got back and there was people everywhere, cars everywhere, so I was glad to be out of there. But um, when I actually hiked on the trail, it was nice, it was cool, it was beautiful. I had a good experience in Mount Rogers.
What's next in terms of US state high points?
So I think this year I'm going to try to finish the South, except for Texas, which is my list finish.
That's right.
Uh,
I remember that.
so no Texas. I mean, I am going to Texas. I'll talk about
Yeah.
that, but it's on a different trip. So I've got, let's see, Florida, Alabama, Louisiana, Arkansas, and is there anything else down there?
Mississippi.
And Mississippi. There we go. So I got those five that I'm hoping to like knock out. And then I need to start chipping away at the Northeast, but that's not a super high priority right now. So I'm kind of like restricting my remaining high points to the northern part of the country, the Northeast, to like finish there, and then Texas.
Yeah. So when do you think you'll be done?
No idea. I think last year I was talking about Denali too. That did not happen. In 2023, I don't know about this year. It doesn't look likely for me, with all the trips that I have planned. So, I don't know. We're looking maybe 5 years out at this point to finish.
We talk occasionally on Facebook, and we're talking about peaks that we want to climb and hikes that we want to do. And you mentioned that every weekend you're out climbing, high pointing,
Almost
hiking.
again.
Are you ever going to run out of peaks to climb for the first time?
Yes, it's possible. I was just having this conversation with friends of mine a few days ago. So I'm heading out again this upcoming weekend on par with what you just said. But I have to drive, I don't know, several hours to get to like destinations that will actually um, give me something that I'm interested in. So if we're talking just peaks, just anything, no, I'll never run out of those. But running out of things that I'm interested in climbing, then yes, like every year is getting harder and further away to climb something that I want to climb, that interests me. So yes, from that perspective, I will run out of stuff.
What about the California 14ers? Have you done those?
I have done those. I have one left, Mount Russell, and I was talking to another friend of mine about finally taking care of that this summer. So maybe that will happen, sometime in August, maybe June. We'll see. Depends on the snow levels.
And what about your county high points? How's that going?
That's going pretty well. I haven't really focused on that as much last year. Um, all the state high points that we talked about, they're all county high points, as everyone knows. Um, I did on that Appalachian trip. I did other more prominent peaks in the Appalachians. So both on the North Carolina side and the Tennessee side, I climbed other things like Roll Knob and High
Hmm.
Knob and several of the famous peaks in the area that are not high points, but they are county high points. So I did a bunch of those, and then I had one orphan left, and the orphan was North Dakota. Um, so in what was it? It was August. So in August, I was like, I need to get this done. I need to get North Dakota out of the way. And I used the opportunity that I had previously. I got a permit for Glacier National Park in Montana. To and I went to climb Mount Cleveland, which is the park high point. So now we're moving on to the national park high points. Um, so I wanted to do Cleveland this year. I got the permit. I did not make the summit on that one. It was very high winds that day, and I was with a team of three others, so it was four of us. There was a really sketchy section that I did not feel comfortable on, so I chose to retreat from that one. They continued, but I do not regret my decision. I think it was the right decision for me that day. Um, but before going to Glacier and meeting up with my friends and attempting this, I wanted to knock out North Dakota. So I drove something crazy that day. It was like 560 miles from Miles City in eastern Montana. I tagged White Butte. I went to Theodore Roosevelt National Park, which was fantastic. I cannot talk about it highly enough. I did a park high point there, um, among like prairie dogs and bison, and then I drove back to Miles City and then back into Montana to meet up with my friends. So um, White Butte was nice. The High Pointers Foundation is building a new trail there, so there was equipment on the trail, but no actual people working because I think it was a Sunday when I was there. But you could definitely see that they were putting work into it, into like having an actual maintained trail. And then stormy clouds were gathering above me, and it was obvious it was going to rain that day. So, I took some pictures. I got out of there. I was glad to have it checked off, and it's beautiful in North Dakota. I love it. It's just winters are so brutal there. So
Yeah. Well, congratulations on getting your orphan high point. I know you mentioned that in the last episode.
I did. I finished the borough high points of New York last year when I stopped by to visit my sister.
Wait, I didn't know you were doing those. Borough high points? Where does it end?
The borough high points in New York are, county equivalents basically. So there's five
Yeah.
of them or six of them in the area.
So what were those like at a park?
Let's see, the Manhattan one, yes, it's a park, and then the Bronx one is a private residence, so I could only go in their driveway. So there's Manhattan, there's Long Island, there's Queens, Bronx, and Brooklyn.
Okay.
And the actual New York High Point is on Staten Island. It's called Todd Hill. So I did that one before. So I guess Staten Island would be another borough too. I think I did a plug for the Peak Bagger application last time, and I'm going to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I get somewhere, I have some time, I pull that out, and I'm like, what is around me? So it gives me a map of all the stuff that is around me. So if I have time,
Yeah.
I will pick and choose from that. And then to all the listeners that may have similar questions, again, feel free to contact me. I'm always available, and I will happily respond to any high pointing questions you may have. So, and
I'll
directly to.
I'll put Mihai's contact information in the show notes.
And
Yeah.
I did like National Monument high points too last year, so I'm not gonna get into that.
Oh, please get into it. Did you do Devil's Tower National Monument?
No, I think technically that is not legal to climb to the top unless you get permission from the National Park Service. But
Yeah.
some of the national monuments are maintained by the Bureau of Land Management, so
Mm-hmm.
on those you can climb. So, like an example of that is in Montana when I was there for Glacier National Park. I also stopped at the Upper Missouri Bluffs National Monument, and that one has a high point in the middle of like agricultural fields. So like I was, trekking along barbed wire fences and getting under them and, trying to like find that location where it is. So I found it. I recorded a track.
Now, you mentioned in the last episode that we did tribal high points.
So Navajo Nation has permits for most of the parks on their property. And I think I was talking about Black Mesa in Arizona, which is the Navajo County High Point there. Um, Friends of mine did it last year. I didn't get to it yet. I know people have questions about it. You have to get a permit for it. Like Monument Valley and Canyon de Chelly, I think also requires uh, permits from the tribe.
That's right. So, how do you get those permits? And are you going to do that?
I think at some point I will. It's not a priority for me right now. I haven't looked into the permit process. There's a website somewhere you can call a number, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, so I can't speak right now.
Now, are you trying to do the county high points in Arizona? Is that why you found yourself in Navajo County?
Yeah, that's another project of mine. Arizona has only 15 counties, I think, so
Mm-hmm.
none of them are on private property. So technically you can do all of them. A lot of people have completed the state. But yes, you have to go on the Navajo reservation to do Black Mesa, which is in that corner there. Yeah.
Well, you've already done Signal Peak in Yuma County, right? We talked about that one.
Yeah, we did talk about that one. That one's a favorite. It's a desert favorite. So
Yeah. You know, I love that one. It's because we were the only people out there on the day that we did it. And it was there were a lot of people around Kofa National Wildlife Refuge that day, but nobody knows about Signal Peak. There's no
yeah,
like clear trailhead. There's no parking lot. You just, it's one of those if you know peaks. And
exactly.
I
Like we
like
should
those.
keep it that way. Yes. Like
Yeah,
just
maybe I shouldn't put it on Apple and Spotify, but I just did.
yeah, again, it's for really dedicated people. I mean, if you want a really trick desert experience, like wilderness experience, like you go to places like Ko-Fi and Signal Peak and like all these other protected areas in Arizona, which are awesome. So,
Yeah.
yes. I know we're getting close to the end. I just want to talk about the eclipse because I'm sure a lot of high pointers will be interested in that.
Yeah,
Um,
you've been posting about that on Facebook. Talk about that.
Correct. Yeah. So that's coming up in 3 months from now, I guess. So April 8th is when it's happening. And there's the totality band is coming from Mexico and going at an angle across Texas and a bunch of other states and exiting the US in Maine. Um, so my plan for that one is to go to Texas. I will not do Guadalupe on that one because, like I said, I'm saving it. But I'm hoping to meet up with friends and maybe visit Big Bend National Park. And when there, hike Emery Peak, which is the park high point, of course. But also enjoy Texas Hill Country, which is where we're hoping to be. And then my friend will be there with me. He's hoping to photograph the eclipse and have a wonderful sequence like he did back in 2017 when we were in Idaho. Um, and then he shot the whole thing, which was amazing and incredible. So that's what we're going for. Like these experiences that you can't really replicate. Like
Hmm.
I keep telling people who ask me, "Hey, how is it? Like, what do you feel? Like, can you describe it?" And the the answer is it's undescribable. You have to be there. You have to feel darkness falling around you when the sun is obscured. Hear the birds stop singing, and all these other things that come with being in a moment like that. So it's something that once you experience, you want to go back and experience it again. So that's why I'm going.
That's fantastic. And, I don't think I've ever experienced an eclipse like that. I've always just been, at work or just in my neighborhood during an eclipse. And it's not a dark sky area wherever I am. And that's something that I would like to experience. I did see Baxter State Park in Maine say that they are already anticipating big crowds.
Right. And so Baxter's going to be closed. It'll be very difficult, if impossible, to climb, Katahdin,
Hmm.
which I was thinking of doing anyway. But the time of the year I feel is not right for being in that part of the country because it's still spring. The weather may be very moody. So, if it's cloudy, you don't get the same experience as you would by being in a clear location. So, obviously, I'm not the only one thinking that. A lot of people will be going to Texas because it has the best chance for clear weather.
Hmm.
Um, there'll be people traveling everywhere. It'll be very busy that weekend. Um, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be again once in a lifetime thing. We're in a new year. It's time to think ahead to what's coming up this year, and I don't know. I just hope that we have the opportunity to travel and be able to get to all these places that we want to get to. I know there's a lot of conflict in the world right now, and it seems like every year there's more happening. So I'm just hoping, for peace and like for people to be able to get along and for us to be able to do what we like to do, right? Like we're not getting in anyone's way. We just want to like go and see and experience stuff. So that's my biggest wish. I just want to be able to have this opportunity.
That's fantastic. And I have to ask my favorite question on the podcast, Mihai, in 2023, what was your favorite outdoor adventure book, documentary, or podcast?
I mean, I'm gonna like be shameless here, and I'm gonna say that your podcast was like the best thing last year. Uh,
Thanks.
because I actually really enjoyed listening to all the other guests you had on this program. So being able to hear other people's experiences and what matters to them, like what motivated them, what drives them to continue, like that is inspirational. And I'm happy to be able to like lend my voice to this group of people. So yes, your podcast was the best thing last year.
Thanks, Mihai. That means a lot. You're a favorite guest on the show, and you're such a staple in the high pointing community. I think people listen to your podcast as a resource, and I know I learned so much just when I talk to you. So I appreciate you coming onto the podcast and offering all of your experience and your knowledge in the area. One documentary that I'd like to recommend to listeners is called The Society of Snow La Sociedad de la Nieve on Netflix, and it is in Spanish, but it's dubbed over in English, and it's about the rugby team from Uruguay whose plane crashes in the Andes, and this was in the 70s. And I don't want to give a lot of it away. It's a book. It's one of the greatest survival stories of our time. The book, as Mihai mentioned, is called Alive. And I read the book. I liked it. It's like I said, it's a great survival story, but I think it's one of those things that when you see it in a movie, I think you have maybe a greater visual understanding of exactly what they went through. You walk away from this story with a sense of, wow, they had this amazing will to live. And when you see what they went through, and it's not just when the plane crashes, I mean, they had so many events that just knocked them down. And they kept saying, like, no, we're going to figure something out. And the lengths that they go to just to live are really, really inspiring. And I would implore the listeners to check out that documentary on Netflix. Again, it's called The Society of Snow.
Yeah, that's a great plug. Thanks, Lauren. I haven't seen it myself, but I have read the book that we just referenced, and it is an incredible story of survival. As part of me doing what I'm doing, I also read a lot, and being being up on the mountain and climbing stuff. I don't want to compare myself to like what those people went through because it's not a valid analogy in any way, but you do feel like you are in a survival mode up on the mountains, especially with something like Chimborazo. I had a really hard time when I started out on the climb, and then I kind of got my second wind. But as I was struggling up the mountain, gasping for air, I did ask myself, "What am I doing here? Like, why am I doing this? Like, is it really worth it to me?"
Mm-hmm.
And then you get into like something clicks, and you get into that mode, like, I'm going to do this. Um, I'm going to get off this mountain. I'm going to get to the top first, and then I will get off the mountain. So, in a way, I can relate to what you described about the story of these people because you want to do it. Like, you will do it.
Yeah.
And then you talk about it later. But when you're in the moment, that's the only thing that matters.
Well, Mihai, thank you again for coming on the show. And I can't wait to hear about your climbs that you continue to do throughout the year. Love for you to come back. And I will put your information, your contact information in the show notes so that if listeners have questions about high points or borough high points or park high points or county high points or GIS things, they can reach out to you because Mihai, you're a great resource. And thanks for coming on my show. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Laura, for keeping the show going, of course.